Several months ago, Charles asked me to do this. It was about, I think, October maybe, whenever he asked me in the hallway if I would speak, and I'm saying speak, whenever he was gone. And I told him just immediately, heavens no, no, couldn't do that, couldn't possibly do that. And I don't think Melinda was with me, and I think I told her later, we got in the car, and I said that Charles had asked me to speak in January, and or I didn't even know when it was. He just wanted me to do it. And I told him no, and she kind of chastised me and said, why did you say no? Because it's funny, because the minute he asked me, I knew exactly what to speak on. I just knew. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And so it took the encouragement of Melinda to push me to do that. And like I said, I say that I'm speaking because tonight, this morning, I don't feel like it's a preaching moment, although there is a little bit, and I'll warn you when it's coming, a little bit of preachiness. But for the most part, this is kind of an insight that if you were to sit around with the Campbell family when we get together, this is kind of the stuff that we discuss. We get into some weird subjects and go all over the place with a lot of different directions. And also want to acknowledge Robbie last week, unbeknownst to him, he laid a good groundwork for what I was going to be talking with today. He spoke about all the things that were put in motion and all the information prior to Jesus coming. So that was a big help. And also I acknowledge this before I get started. I acknowledged in the first service that it's funny, I'm no different than any other, I'm going to say man, in that when I was a young man, I felt like I knew everything. I did. And just ask any maybe 20-year-old in here, young man, he's going to be an expert at everything. He knows it. But it's funny, now here I'm in my mid-50s, and I realize just how little I do know. And it's kind of a transition. And I told him, I said, if I'm able to live a great long life, I hope that at the end, and I'm standing before God, that I know that I can stand there and just lay on my face and go, I don't know anything. I will be completely diminished. But it is all about Him at that point. So the older I get, it's the less about me, the more about Him. And so I hope that that's the end result, is to be zero when I'm done. Okay. Oh, and I need to acknowledge before I get started that there's kind of a subtle joke in my slide up here, and that I have the plan, and being as I'm such an ADD person, many of you as you go through this are going to be wondering, where is he going with this? So you need a map to keep track of it. So that's kind of a subtle joke. The verse that I'm going to talk about today, and I'm basically just expanding on one verse that to me covers from Genesis to Revelation in just 17 words. Many of my friends have heard me talk about this, so they know it's kind of, they got a little bit of a lead in of what I'm talking about. But I'll ask if you will turn to your Bibles and turn to John 1:1, if you would, and stand with me. And we're going to recite it just like we always do. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Thanks be to God. You can all sit down. Now I'm going to assume in this Christian audience that everybody knows here, or at least you're somewhat familiar with it, you know that when we see the word Word written there, it's referring to Jesus. And we know that based on Scripture, that is what that means. So if we wanted to, and it's safe among most evangelicals to do this, that if I want to, I'm going to substitute the name Jesus for Word And we really haven't changed anything, but I just want to go through. I'm going to do this several times. In the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. Now that happens to be a very good explanation of at least two persons of the Trinity. And here's what I mean by that. It's a description of God the Father and God the Son being in the beginning. Genesis 1:26 reads, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image and in our likeness.'" Notice the plural there. Day one, right at the beginning. There's us, we, our image. And then at the Council of Nicaea in about the 4th or 5th century, I've got that off the top of my head, I can't remember. But the Nicene Creed that we recite today, it's found in your Methodist hymnal. There's one line in there that says, "Begotten and not made, one being with the Father." And what that says is, nothing created God. And it asserts the deity of Christ. And actually, around that time with the Council of Nicaea, that was a huge schism in Christendom at that time. Lots of bloodshed over that one statement when we started establishing the Father and the Son both being God. And we take it for granted right now, or most of us do. Well, back in the 90s, I used to listen to a Christian apologist on the radio. His name was R.C. Sproul. He had a program called Renewing Your Mind. A Christian apologist is kind of an interesting guy. He wasn't a preacher on the radio so much. A Christian apologist is someone, a theologian, who is a defender of the Christian faith. So what he does is he categorically and he systematically can argue the faith and argue for Christianity. So he's kind of got a little bit different teaching, the way he talks about things. Well, one day, he was talking about John 1:1. And he was telling that where we see the word word written there, in earlier Greek, it was originally written, the word was logos put in there. And so, allow me one more time. I'm going to do another translation of the John 1:1, but this time the translation is going to be the Greeklish. I used to call it the Billy Campbell one, but it's Greeklish. So so listen to this. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And we can see here, like I said, I went and got this off the internet. This is just an etymology of the word logic. And you can see that what we did is the origins of the word logic comes from logos. You can see how it transitioned through time to become logic. Now here's where I'm going to warn you that I stepped off onto a slippery slope with this thing. I started intellectualizing this verse. I started thinking of this verse more philosophically than spiritually. And from a 20th century perspective, if you read this verse like that, you kind of get that in the beginning there was human thought and reason. But nothing could be further from the truth. Matter of fact, I believe that verse with the word logic in it is so dangerous that I won't even repeat it. I won't even say it out loud because I feel that strongly about it. But there's always a but. But by the grace of God, I was having a conversation with a coworker. And we had a product that we manufactured at the company I worked with, and we called it a Logix, Logix. Kind of a cute spelling of Logix to be, for marketing. And I don't recall the details of the conversation, but in that conversation we were talking about it, and he understood the word logic to mean plan. And it's real simple, that if you do a task without a plan, it's illogical. And if you do a task with a plan, that's logical. So it's a simple concept. The case in point, if I was going to bake a cake, I would need to have a recipe, and I would need to follow it to the T. And everybody that's a baker knows that baking is different from cooking. It's chemistry. And if you vary the ingredients, vary the time, vary the temperature, you don't get consistent outcome. I shared earlier that my mom was making a cake one time. It's been just maybe 10 years ago. She was making a cake. It was called a Milky Way cake. This was a cake from scratch. And she mistakenly used powdered sugar instead of flour in this mix. Well, you can imagine 40 minutes later at 350 degrees, there was this molten, bubbling mess of terrible sugar molten, and it was overflowing the pan, and it was so bad that we actually had to replace that oven. It was so bad. It was that bad. And my mom, I wish she could hear this because it's funny, because a big joke around our house for years has always been that my mother used the smoke alarm as the kitchen timer. And she was a good cook, and like I said, she would laugh at that too. Also, let's say if I was going to go on a trip, when we were going on a trip to Dallas, and I just got in my car and drove for 5 hours, just randomly, any direction. That's not going to get me to my goal. You would have not used logic if you did that. First thing you would need to do is you need to decide, is my car capable of making this trip? Do I have enough gas? Do I know the path that I'm going to go on? When you leave your driveway, do you go to the right or the left? How am I going to get there? You're simply starting with a plan. So it's only logical to start with a plan. Military do a great deal of planning, because what they do, if everyone doesn't follow the plan, it can have catastrophic results. I was looking for something to put up here for a slide for doing that, and in my mind, I had visions of old war movies, and you've got these guys down in a bunker, and they're all foxhole, and they're gathered around a Coleman lantern with their maps, and they're trying to decide what they're going to do to take out this hill or take out this gun emplacement. And everybody gets out and they synchronize their watches, so we're all going to hit at the same time. Synchronizing watches used to be a big deal because everybody's analog watch was off. They drifted. But that's the vision that I had. It was those military men making this plan. Now, my son Matthew, he's a firefighter with the city of Beaumont. And in his fire training, he told me of this axiom that the fire department have. All fire departments go by this axiom. It says, risk a lot to save a lot. Risk nothing to save nothing. Well, on June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Allies landed 156,000 troops in Normandy, France, to bring an end to the war in Europe. It had been going on for many years. The Blitzkrieg with the Nazis had charged across Europe, had recently just invaded France and took over France. There was the whole movie here a few years ago, Dunkirk, that was celebrating that, how the Allied troops had been just pushed out of Europe, and probably Britain was probably next. Now, and let me clarify before I get started here that casualties are defined by the military as dead or wounded. And when we say wounded, they are wounded so bad that they are hospitalized and taken out of battle. So this is a serious injury when you're talking about casualties. But in 1943, the U.S. planners were predicting, with this D-Day invasion, they predicted 13% of the troops would drown. 25% would become casualties in the initial fighting on the beach. And in that first week, that they would lose 3% of the men just in Normandy. The British 12th Army, they predicted their casualties would be 13% of the 70,000 British and Canadian troops that landed on Sword, Juno, and Gold Beaches. So we're talking about over 73,000 casualties is what they had predicted. Their plan, they had come together and said their plan, 73,000 men. 73,000 men would either lose their lives or be seriously injured to achieve, look at that, see the little dotted line? That's all they were doing. It was going to cost 73,000 lives. You got to answer it. Is it worth it? Or was it worth it?
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Now that address, that was Eisenhower's speech or address that was given to the men before they set out on this, before they set out on the invasion. Let me take an excerpt out of there. It says, "You are about to embark upon a great crusade to which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck." And even with the predicted losses, remember I said over 73,000 men would lose their lives or be casualties. Eisenhower made the decision. He had full responsibility. He made the decision that we should go forward with that. Now, high casualties were expected in the first wave. And Eisenhower actually even felt it, considered it so likely that it would fail that he had a press release in his pocket that he kept, accepting full responsibility if the mission had failed. But it luckily wasn't needed. By midnight of the first day, Allied casualties were only documented, and I say only documented, at 10,000 men, with 4,400 confirmed dead. Now, this price was still great. Many severely injured and so many losses of life, but still far below what was expected and what was in the plan. So allow me now one more time. I want to paraphrase Eisenhower's speech. But this is how I would imagine that same speech seen in heaven. But from God the Father to God the Son. Son, you are about to embark on a great crusade to which we have striven since the beginning. The fate of the whole world rests upon you. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Now let me switch gears. I'm going to take you on a rabbit trail here. Other side of the world. Most people know that General MacArthur was put in charge of the work to rebuild Japan after the surrender of the Japanese. But here's somebody that most of you have never heard of. This guy, Joseph Duran. Joseph Duran was a pioneer in the study of quality control. And likely, unless you've ever sat in an industrial engineering course, you probably have actually never heard of him. But many of you have been exposed to some of his works. If anyone has ever been involved in a Six Sigma study at work, anybody? Well, even First Service had Six Sigma studies. No? Okay. Six Sigma study. But you can thank Mr. Duran for that. But many of you know about the impeccable quality of Japanese cars. That's not debatable. There's actually a manufacturing method that's actually known as the Toyota method. And that method has been used by all industries all over the world. They use it for dinner. You can adapt it to just about anything. And the roots of that Toyota method go back to this man. Because after World War II, the nation of Japan was crushed. But rather than occupying it, the U.S. government rebuilt them. And Joseph Duran and his colleagues, they were sent over there to help rebuild the economy. And we all see the results of his work. Many Japanese companies known today for their quality. And Toyota was one example that was it's a very successful company. It's one of the largest is the largest manufacturing automobile company in the world. It all goes back to what he did after World War II. Let me go back now to my points, what my notes say. That was the red herring, I guess you could say. In the beginning, God had a plan to save all of us because he knew it was impossible on our own. The plan was to send his son Jesus, to be born of a virgin, live as a human, be sentenced to death on a cruel cross, be beaten, spit upon, mocked, die a painful death, just to save you. Was it worth it? I'm going to read John 1:1 again. This time, allow me to insert the word plan where you see the word word. And see if it takes on a different meaning to you. In the beginning was the plan. And the plan was with God. And the plan was God. God's plan was to send his son Jesus. And he weighed the cost and still executed the plan and put the plan in motion. Now, I have a warning. It actually says here in my notes, warning, here's where the preachy part begins. All of us who call ourselves Christians are part of God's plan. So my question to you today is, what part do you play in God's plan? Are you part of the invasion force? Maybe out on the mission field, kind of like Charles is doing? Hitting the beaches, taking on the devil full force? Like, onward Christian soldiers marching as to war? Wish I could sing, but... Or maybe you're called to be like Joseph Duran, who came alongside those who were defeated, and you restore them. What comes to mind is ministries like Kairos, prison ministries, or the Jubilee for the women. Those people come along, those who have been broken, been destroyed, and restore them so that one day they can be prosperous. They can live in the full joy of Christ. Either way, whether you're doing the evangelical work or you're doing the restorative work, you're part of the plan. So what I ask is, please make God's plan to sacrifice his son worth it. You don't need to start your own ministry. You simply just need to get on board with where God's already working. Those of us who were in the thing during the Sunday school hour, right there, I was sitting here thinking to myself of what I was talking about. There it is. You don't have to go. I know that I've sat in the past and gone, oh, I want to do more, I want to do more. How can I help? You don't have to come up with something new. God's working. He is working all around us, and there are people involved in ministries and assistance programs. All you have to do is be willing to participate. 1 John 3:18 says, "My little children, let us not live in word or tongue, but in deed and truth." That's kind of putting a works in there, but you need to. I'm going to end now with a slide from, or a quote from R.C. Sproul. It said, "The call to love is not so much a call to a certain state of feelings as it is to a quality of action." And that's what I asked, is just, it's just a call to action. God's people. Amen.